Good morning and welcome to the Bellingham City Council Committee meetings. Today is Monday, October 11th, 2021. This morning we are beginning with Public Works and Natural Resources, and that committee is chaired by Councilmember Lilliquist. So I will turn it over to him at this time.
Thank you, Hannah. Hold on a second. Okay, we have 4 items for the Public Works and Natural Resources Committee. First of all, we've had some substitutions. Several committee members weren't able to be here. And so Councilmembers Huffman and Stone will be serving with me this morning on the committee. So again, we have 4 items before us. The first 2 are related to each other. The first one will be a pipeline safety program presentation by Sean Mayo of the Washington State Utilities and Transportation Commission. And then the next item will have to do with a local franchise ordinance for a pipeline. Hold on a second as I navigate the documents. So Mr. Mayo is the director of the pipeline safety at the Washington State UTC, and he'll be providing an overview of pipeline safety program in the state of Washington. This program began inspecting natural gas systems in 1955. Interstate hazardous liquid pipelines were added to the UTC authority later in 1996, and in 2000, the legislature approved the Pipeline Safety Act, directing the program to seek federal approval to include inspections of all interstate pipelines. In 2003, after working closely with the U.S. Department of Transportation, Pipeline and Hazardous Safety Materials Administration for 2 years, the Pipeline Safety Program became now the lead inspector for all interstate pipeline inspections and incidents within the state of Washington. This is important because I mentioned the next item we have will have to do with a pipeline franchise in the city of Bellingham. City Council expressed a strong interest in learning more about pipeline safety that was beyond the city's ability to ensure, but was the responsibility of state agencies. Mr. Johnston, would you like to begin, or should we go with Mr. Mayo right away?
Well, just very briefly, want to say express appreciation to Mr. Sean Mayo for joining us this morning. He and I have chatted a couple times on the phone, and we're glad to have him here with us this morning. But I'll turn it directly over to him, if I could, to go through his presentation and for questions from the council.
Thank you, Mr. Mayo. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to get a chance to talk about pipeline safety in Washington State and our program here at the UTC. Hopefully everyone is able to see my screen share as I get over to slideshow.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, great. Again, my name is Sean Mayo. I'm the Director of Pipeline Safety here at the Utilities and Transportation Commission. Here to talk to you about a few things today. Basically, our mission, the structure of our team here, a little bit about our regulatory framework, a little bit about the pipeline operators that we inspect, and talk a little bit about our inspection program, and then save a little bit of time for questions you might have about our operation here. So the Utilities and Transportation Commission houses the Pipeline Safety Division, which is going to be the bulk of my presentation this morning, but we also have other divisions that ensure that utility and transportation services are fairly priced, reliable, and safe. The 2 other divisions that are really the main efforts, other than the Pipeline Safety Division here at the Commission, are our Transportation Safety Division, which comprises railroad safety and motor carrier safety and licensing, and our Regulatory Services Division, which really is the rates side of that fairly priced and reliability. We also have a Consumer Protection Division that receives hotline calls when folks have complaints about their utility or transportation services that the Commission regulates. As for us, the Pipeline Safety Division, we conduct inspection, investigation, enforcement activities related to the United States Department of Transportation's Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration, otherwise known as PHMSA. Their jurisdictional pipelines, and we also have the responsibility to enforce our state's damage prevention law, also known as the DIG law, RCW 19-122. 19-122. So for our team, we have one chief engineer who is an energy utilities engineer 4, and 8 inspectors comprising our inspection staff. And those engineers and those energy and utilities engineers are trained and certified in pipeline safety inspections by the feds. There is an extensive training and qualifications program where we send those engineers down to Oklahoma City, and they learn all about regulatory enforcement and inspection activities for natural gas and hazardous liquid pipelines. On the other side of that coin, we have an operations staff comprised of an operations manager, a management analyst, a program specialist, and investigator. The bulk of their work outside of the management analyst, the bulk of everyone's work there centers around our third-party damage prevention program and enforcement of that DIG law. That investigator and program specialist are really the lead agents for outreach, education, and investigation and enforcement of all things related to call before you dig law. Any questions on the composition of our team? Okay. So our regulatory framework stretches back to federal U.S. Code, Chapter 601, Safety, and 49 CFR 190 through 199 is basically the bulk of natural gas and hazardous liquid safety regulation promulgated by PHMSA. We do have intrastate rules and law under RCWs, the 2 RCWs and WAC 480 there, depicted on that slide. And those laws go above and beyond, in certain cases, above and beyond what the federal code requires of pipeline operators. Any questions on that slide? Okay, in a nutshell, this is who we regulate. We are one of the very few states in the country that have both intrastate and interstate inspection authority. It differs a little bit with the interstate operators. We have both an interstate agency for gas and liquid pipelines. We have inspection authority, we have investigation authority, and we submit our findings to PHMSA in DC, and PHMSA conducts enforcement based on our recommendations. For the intrastate pipelines, we are the authority. We have enforcement authority here at the commission as well. So at the intrastate level, both natural gas and liquids operators, there's a listing of some of those operators there. And there's also a listing there, again, on the interstate side below that. And again, we have enforcement authority at the intrastate level. If we find violations at the interstate level, we forward our findings along with our evidence and our recommendations to PHMSA, who then takes action, enforcement action. There's a link on that slide, and the link should be active in the packet that I provided last week to the committee, to our website. And our website has a full list of every operator that we regulate. And you can go in and look at inspection documentation from every inspection that we do, save for the interstate operators. I do not have the authority to release those findings. The feds have put that under FOIA restrictions. So there is a link provided for those documents as well for the person to contact at PHMSA to request documentation of those inspections. But our website is quite robust, and we've got a lot of documentation and a lot of history, a lot of our inspection history located in that website there. Any questions on who we regulate or the nuances between the intra and interstate programs?
I do have a question, Mr. Mayo. As you say, you have different roles for intrastate and interstate, but are you applying the same safety standards? Are they the same standards regardless of what your role is?
So yes, basically, although with one caveat, I cannot enforce intrastate or Washington state rules on interstate operators. So parts 190 through 199, 49 CFR 190 through 199, the federal code applies to everyone. The intrastate rules, particularly for a gas operator, it's WAC 48093. And for a liquids operator, it's 48075. Those apply to intrastate operators, not to interstate operators. Any other questions?
Keep going.
Thank you. So just in a nutshell, our inspection program, we have routine and scheduled inspections. And there's a whole raft of inspection work that we do every year. With standard inspections, those are broken down into, we look at a pipeline company's procedures, their records, and their field observations. Basically, we look at their procedures to ensure that they cover the entirety of their requirements. They must have a procedure for their company that leads their company to comply with all safety regulations that are applicable to that company. And then we look at records to ensure that they have record of meeting those compliance requirements. And then we check on the folks in the field to make sure that what is on paper is actually happening on the ground. Our inspectors spend a minimum of 85 days a year out in the field with these pipeline operators, observing their actions, both in the field with components of their system and looking over records at the pipeline operators' facilities. We look at construction, maintenance, and testing on a regular basis. In fact, our intrastate rules provide that natural gas distribution companies, in particular Cascade Natural Gas is applicable in your neck of the woods there. They've got to send me a notification in the every morning of where their construction and maintenance crews are going to be. And our inspectors are dropping in on them at random intervals with no notice to make sure that they are doing the right thing and to make sure that their operations and construction are in accordance with all the safety rules that are applicable to them. We also look at the headquarters programs. Operators are required to have myriad headquarters programs overarching throughout the entirety of their system. Integrity management programs, operator qualification programs. Let me back up a bit. Integrity management is that operator is required to evaluate their system for all known risks to the system and put preventive and mitigative measures in place to deal with those threats to their system. Operator qualification. The operator is responsible for using only qualified and trained individuals to work on any portion of their pipeline that affects integrity of the system. Public awareness. The operator is required to have liaison with first responders and public officials and emergency first responders in the area that they operate their system in. And they also need to let the public know in the area of what operations are ongoing in their area, and provide them with mailers and just an awareness, a public awareness of, hey, we're operating a pipeline in this area, and just ensure the public is aware of the product and contact numbers if they see anything sort of out of the ordinary. The operators are required to maintain a drug and alcohol program where they test their their covered personnel on for use of drugs and alcohol to make sure that the folks that are operating their system are not impaired. And then control room management as well. So basically the nerve center of that operator that monitors pressures and flow rates and valves and basically situational awareness monitoring and control of that pipeline. So those are really the scheduled inspections that we do on a routine basis. And if you go back and you look at our website, you'll see a history of those particular documents. And then we do a lot of unscheduled and episodic inspections. So if a lot of these fall into the investigation category, if there is an accident somewhere or a leak somewhere that results in an accident, oftentimes we conduct an investigation on that. If there's a near miss, similarly. And then public complaints, oftentimes we'll get a complaint from a member of the public, either directly to our division or a member of our consumer protection division will forward the complaint on to us about, if a member of the public has a problem with one of our regulated companies with what they're doing. As an example, we've had in the past a member of the public contact us with concerns about a distribution company down here in the South Puget Sound area, and their installation of a service line on his property, and we sent an investigator out there to make sure that the installation of that service line was in accordance with all federal and state pipeline safety regulations. And then compliance and enforcement. If we put a particular operator on a compliance or enforcement program, we drop in on that company a little bit more often. Let me back up a little bit. Our routine and scheduled inspections are risk-based. So the feds required me to go look at these pipeline operators on a 5-year interval. We drop in on them a lot more frequently than that because 5 years is a pretty long time. So we like to see our operators for our distribution companies. We see them every year routinely, and we don't always do an operator qualification inspection every year. We'll spread those out. Those headquarters inspections are spread out, so we have many more touch points with operators than the federal standard is 5 years. We like to visit folks every 3 at a minimum, and our distribution companies, because they operate in built-up areas around the public a lot more than many of these other companies do. We see, as an example, we see Cascade every single year. Any questions on our inspection program? All right. So I just told you what we like to do, and basically the meat and potatoes of our work. Everybody's got a boss. In some case, I have several. And PHMSA is the Federal Department of Transportation. Again, Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration is what that acronym traces back to. And PHMSA comes and looks at me every year. PHMSA provides a grant that will reimburse up to 80% of the cost of running this program. It's been closer to 60%, and in some cases below that in recent years, but by statute, that grant can reimburse up to 80% of what it costs us to run this program here. PHMSA comes down every year and evaluates both my gas and liquid program grants to make sure that I'm doing what I told them I would do. PHMSA's Office of State Programs is run out of Oklahoma City, and they have regional state program liaisons that come out and they visit us every year, and they go through from tip to tail on everything that we did in the previous year. So just like we go and we evaluate these pipeline companies, PHMSA sends an auditor out to visit us, and they spend a week or more with us looking over all of our procedures, all of our records, and they also spend an inspection in the field with one of our engineers to ensure that our inspector is doing what he's supposed to be doing, he or she is supposed to be doing. So those are those three components: the records, the office audit, the field audit, and the grant application, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. So every year, each of those programs gets a deep dive visit from a PHMSA auditor, and that's a lot of fun. Also, similarly, our damage prevention, investigation, and enforcement program is also audited annually. RCW 19122 is our dig law. It's call before you dig, 811, all of that stuff. We are evaluated yearly on our enforcement effectiveness. And one of the things that everyone from here at the program on up to the feds is the enforcement is not only applied to the person with the shovel or the track hoe or the drill rig, it's also applied to make sure that pipeline operators and telecom companies and water companies and public works departments and public utility divisions are upholding their requirements as a facility operator or facility owner. So that the big law applies a lot more broadly than our pipeline safety regulation does, and we get evaluated to make sure that not only are we applying the law to the folks with the shovel in the hand, we're also applying the law to the facility owners to ensure that when they get called from 811, that they're out marking their stuff accurately and on time within those requirements. And if that weren't enough, I get a financial audit every 3 years to where PHMSA sends a person with a very sharp pencil to come visit us, and basically we show them we open our books and show them that we're using the grant money appropriately, and we're not trying to sprinkle in costs into our grant that don't belong in there. So that's how the feds come and look at us every year. And next slide, I think I'm going to talk about those three scored components and the impact to that grant. But I'll pause here for questions on this slide. Okay. So those three scored components that we talked about is that grant application and progress report. Each year, I tell the feds what my plan is for the year and how I'm going to execute the objectives, not only of the feds, but of our program here in the state. And that is scored. Also, that program performance, where PHMSA shows up and they look at all of our procedures and all of our records for the preceding year. And then the third component is the field audit. That PHMSA evaluator spends an entire inspection with one of our engineers to make sure that the inspection is going according to our requirements. So the impact to this is, again, remember I mentioned that the bulk of the cost of our program here is paid for by PHMSA, up to 80%. Last year, I think it was 61, depending, and it depends really on what money the feds have for available to fund the states. But the effect of these evaluations is, if we score poorly, it affects our funding, and poor performance can also affect a state certification. There have been instances where the feds come down and evaluate a state program, and the state program is not meeting the requirements of U.S. code and not meeting the requirements of a pipeline safety program participation. And the feds will withdraw a state certification, and that's typically bad news. I'm happy to report that over the last multiple years, Our program routinely scores in the 95th or better percentile in all of these audits. We got a perfect score this year. We got a perfect score 2 years ago. So we generally perform exceedingly well in meeting our requirements for the feds. Any questions on that?
Mr. Mayo, I have a question.
Sure.
Is the state of the art on pipeline safety and inspections changing? If auditor or inspectors are constantly being evaluated, are they kind of like having to learn and apply new technologies or new ideas in pipeline safety to kind of keep state of the art? Or is it pretty much kind of like, we know what we're doing, we're just making sure we're doing it right?
So we get guidelines every year from the feds. The feds publish state guidelines for participation in the Pipeline Safety Program grant. And the requirements can change year over year, but we're not looking at a sea change, right? It's the basic requirements are in federal code, and federal code and the WAC can take a little while to change from rulemaking. The feds most recently have updated a good portion of their code to a little more stringency, which is good. We like to see that. In some cases, they are catching up to things that we put in the WACs for our intrastate portions, and they've adopted some recommendations that the states have made to them. One of the things that I do is we try to get as much additional training as we can fit. It's been a little bit more of a challenge over the last year and a half for us for obvious reasons. But in addition to the certification of our inspectors that go through the training down in Oklahoma City over a period of years, we also sprinkle in other industry certifications. As an example, the American Petroleum Institute has a certification called API 1169, which is a construction inspector, which it's a pretty rigorous evaluation, and it's a tough certification to attain. It takes a lot of study, but we like to invest in our inspectors and go out and give them the opportunity to pursue some additional certifications on top of just your basic pipeline safety certification in a liquid and gas program. So we were able to get 5 folks through that training a year and a half just before the pandemic hit. I've got half of our inspectors are 1169 certified, which means that's the industry standard for a construction inspector, where they can, it just adds another layer of credibility, and it adds some more. It adds an additional level of awareness and certification for them. There's also other programs out there that we like to get folks to attend and attain certification in, corrosion protection. The National Association of Corrosion Engineers, NACE, has certain certification levels where we send our engineers out to training, and they will take the certification test to sort of specialize in some corrosion engineering and cathodic protection disciplines. So to answer your question in a shorter manner, we do try to stay on top of best practices and industry certifications. We want to know what the industry knows, because it's not just sufficient to read a piece of federal code and not really have the operational and the nuts and bolts understanding of how the operationalization of that what's going on the ground. Anybody can read a rule and sort of follow a paper checklist, but we take a lot more holistic approach to that in our inspection program. Any other questions? So here's some contact information. My information is right up there. Our website up at the top has a ton of information. But if you don't want to pick through the website and you have questions, there's my contact information. You can call me anytime with any questions that you might have. And then the second set of bullets down there at the bottom, I did not include in the packet, but it occurred to me that I should probably stump for the Governor's Citizens Committee on Pipeline Safety. This is a hard committee to keep filled. There is a city's representative on there that is currently filled, but I've got a couple of vacancies. The committee has a couple of vacancies for the general public. So if you have folks that are interested in joining the Citizens Committee on Pipeline Safety, this is a committee that meets quarterly, that works on pipeline safety issues in the state. They were formed in the wake of that Pipeline Safety Act legislation that were to help provide guidance and sort of oversight on the state's pipeline safety program. We've got some vacant seats, and they meet quarterly. It's not a heavy lift, but if you've got folks, if you know anyone that is interested in continued public service and a membership in this committee, we would certainly like to see folks sign up to apply for that committee. And if you've got questions about that, I'm more than happy to help with the application process and sort of walk folks through that as well. So that basically concludes the what I had to brief you on. I'll stand here and take all the questions that I can.
No, Mr. Mayor, that was quite helpful. As I said, the reason for the council's interest is that it was important for us to understand what other levels of government were doing in an area where we ourselves sort of don't have the authority to protect our community. We want to make sure they are protected. Committee members, any further questions for Mr. Mayo? Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayo. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll now go on to the next item, which has to do with a local franchise agreement.
Councilmember Lillquist?
Yes.
Real quick, I just wanted to thank Mr. Mayo for the presentation. And as Councilmember Lillquist mentioned, it's critical for us to understand, as he said, the additional layers. And I appreciate you highlighting the opportunity for community members to participate in that committee. So we'll certainly share that information. I also want to make note for the public that this presentation wasn't included in the packet, but it was provided to the council by email, and then we will update the online packet to make sure that members of the community have access to this presentation. So thank you very much. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's great. Thank you very much for that, Hannah. The next one is an item on the proposed ordinance that would renew the Olympic Pipeline franchise. The Olympic Pipeline Company, LLC, maintains a liquid petroleum pipeline within city rights of way and public property pursuant to its franchise agreement with the city. The current 10-year franchise term expires on November of this year, and Olympic has applied for renewal. The staff recommends that the franchise be renewed for additional 10-year period on the same terms and conditions. Staff are here to introduce the draft renewal ordinance for council discussion and feedback. And again, the larger context here is the city council wanted to understand exactly what our choices and range of responsibilities are. And a lot of people would like to see us take action on the pipeline, for example, to ensure its greater safety, or perhaps to kind of disfavor fossil fuel pipelines in general as a matter of climate concern. And sort of both of those avenues are not really open to the city council. And we just heard about the safety aspect. And then the fossil fuel aspect is even more complicated in a different way. Mr. Johnston, would you like to begin?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lillquist, and I appreciate Sean Mayo's presentation. It was informative. I'm glad he was able to join us. So this is the third of the three franchises that the city has for pipelines, and my apologies for the dog in the background. The kids are just getting up. So, but this is the third of the franchises the city has for pipelines in the city. The first was Trans Mountain, the second was Cascade Natural Gas, and the third is the Olympic Pipeline franchise. And as has been our practice with these franchises, we come to the council on three occasions. The first is just to introduce the item, which is the purpose today. It will come back at the meeting in November, and again for final approval in November. So this proposed renewal of the franchise is proposing no changes. So as the current franchise currently stands, Olympic Pipeline has agreed to or suggested that they proceed forward with no changes to either the franchise ordinance or associated agreements. Staff has reviewed that proposal and has reviewed it against the recommendations from the local Pipeline Safety Trust, and are satisfied that proceeding forward as is presented in the packet is the appropriate mechanism to do. Mr. Stamps has been helping with this ordinance and franchise agreement as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have from the council today.
Thank you, Eric. Committee members, any questions or discussion on this item?
Approval for recommendation.
Thank you, Holly. So we have a motion to recommend approval of the franchise agreement this evening with a full council. Basically, this is a renewal agreement, no particular changes. If there's no further discussion, I'm going to go ahead and call the question. Mr. Stamps, yes, go ahead.
Oh, I would just note that it's before council today, just as an information only, not for any, there's no action required today from council.
Okay. Shall I go ahead and report the recommendation, but request no action be taken this evening?
That would work out just fine, yeah.
Then it wouldn't need to come back to committee at the next meeting. It could go straight to committee of the whole, for example.
It could go to committee of the whole next session when it actually comes forward for a vote on first and second. We could proceed that way, or it could come back to this committee. Really, it's at your direction that we would make that selection.
Well, it seems to me the committee is already making a recommendation. No reason to come back. Do committee members feel comfortable with that? I got a shrug and a nod. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call the question. All committee members in favor of recommending approval of the franchise ordinance to the committee of the whole at a future meeting signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that comes forward. We'll come forward tonight with a positive recommendation for action at a later date. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Stamps. The next item is emergency repairs to a post point generator controls and the building roof. During the September 17th windstorm, the roof of the Post Point Resource Recovery Plant emergency generator building caught on fire. The Bellingham Fire Department responded, extinguished the fire. The fire department and Post Point maintenance crew investigated the fire and found the generator control issues that led to the exhaust being hot enough to ignite the wood roof. The generator and the roof are critical to ensuring operations at Post Point. Staff awarded an emergency contract to Colacurcio Brothers Incorporated to repair the generators and replace the roof. They did so without soliciting the usual competitive bids on an emergency basis. Under the municipal code, which authorizes emergency contracts, it provides the city council must pass a resolution declaring that emergency did exist at that time, and that proposed resolution is attached. Mr. Johnston, or maybe an attorney, I don't know who wants to take this.
No, this is on my plate. So we did have a small fire down at Post Point. It was not a dramatic conflagration by any stretch of the imagination, but it was enough to cause some damage that needs to be repaired in a very as efficient manner as we possibly can. So following the city code and the requirements that we have to for declaring an emergency as a result of a fire, we are bringing this resolution to council. It is going to be more than $40,000, which does require the council action. So it's pretty straightforward in the resolution. We need a retroactive approval to have executed or be in the process of executing the contract for the emergency repairs at Post Point. And Post Point, there was never any interruption in service. Small little, we do have 2 generators that make sure that we're operable down at Post Point, and just a slight, although somewhat dramatic interruption in the day-to-day proceedings at Post Point.
Thank you. Committee members?
I'll move approval of the resolution.
Okay, I have a motion to approve the resolution declaring an emergency. I think I saw the repairs would come to around $100,000, and I'm just wondering what the budget impact of that. Do we have any kind of maintenance contingency fund for Post Point, or is that more than we would have set aside normally?
We should be able to absorb that within our existing maintenance and operations budget this year. If things get a little tight towards the end of 2022, we might need to come back for some additional authorization. But at this point in time, I'm not seeing a challenge with that.
Thank you. Councilmember Stone?
So I just wanted a brief question. So this, the fire was actually was that on the 17th? I was just curious if there was a reason. It could just be workloads and others, but why this didn't come forward at the last. I think we've had one meeting between the events and then this council meeting.
Correct, and we knew we had time to get it to the October to this meeting, and the time between when the fire occurred and when we realized we needed to do the full authorization. Just the lag in the couple of days didn't get us to the last city council meeting. If the dollar amount had been less than around, I think $40,000 is the threshold, we can do the administratively. When we came to the realization that the cost was going to be more than that, then we put it on the calendar for today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Any further discussion? Okay, the motion is to recommend approving the resolution to declare an emergency, justifying the emergency repairs and no bid process. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that will come forward with another positive recommendation tonight. The last item is a service and stormwater comprehensive plan overview. On March 8th of last year, actually, council requested city staff provide an overview of the surface and stormwater comprehensive plan. The plan was approved by the council back in November of last year, and the staff have a brief presentation on the plan that will focus on the prioritization of the projects within that plan. I'm sure Mr. Porter is here, but Mr. Johnson, do you want to say anything first?
Nope, I really have nothing to add. Jason Porter will give us a quick overview from the council's request in earlier this year. Be happy to answer any questions as they come up. So Jason.
All right, here we go with some screen sharing. Let's make sure this is. All right, can everybody see that? Nope, but don't have a response. Looking good. Okay, perfect. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Jason Porter. I'm here again. And this time I'm going to be talking about our Surface and Stormwater Comprehensive Plan. I'll do a brief overview of that. Okay, so the purpose of today's presentation is, like what Director Johnson was saying, is to provide City Council a very brief overview of our recently updated Surface and Stormwater Comprehensive Plan, right? So again, this is what Director Johnson just said, but this is a follow-up to his statement at the end of the March 8th Public Works and Natural Resource Committee that I'd be coming back, or that Public Works staff will be coming back to provide this presentation. So for today's presentation, I'm going to really briefly summarize some of the content and material that's within the comprehensive plan. But most of what I'm going to be focusing on is how we prioritize our fish passage and water quality projects, what the 303D listings and TMDL statuses are of our priority waterways. And then finally, I'll talk about our current projects related to water quality and fish passage. All right, so I thought it'd be important to kind of remind council what some of the core responsibilities are of the surface and stormwater utility. This is the same and similar information that I presented last year. Actually, it was about this time in October, November, when we were going through the comprehensive plan update. So again, just as a reminder, the core responsibilities of the utility are to protect aquatic resources, provide a response to flooding and erosion damages, reduce flood risk, reduce the discharge of pollutants, and to improve fish habitat. Right. So something else that I brought up last year during the adoption of this plan was that the city of Bellingham is a little unique, not completely unique, in the way that our surface and stormwater utility actually funds both our surface and stormwater program areas, where other municipalities really just have a stormwater utility that focuses on the other funding fund surface water, such as creek habitat restorations. And so we are well positioned here in the city. All right, 2020 Surface and Stormwater Comprehensive Plan that end of last year includes a lot of information about the surface and stormwater utility. Some of the chapters of importance include a chapter on climate change considerations for stormwater planning, a stormwater assessment, a program evaluation, a system analysis, a capital improvement plan, recommended stormwater management implementation strategies, and a financial program review. Now, I do want to say that chapters within the comprehensive planning, including an introduction and background section, but these chapters here that I'm mentioning are really what's probably the most body or important information within the comprehensive plan, what I kind of wanted to highlight with this overview. Okay, so prioritization for projects. Well, chapter 2 of the Surface and Stormwater Comprehensive Plan includes information on how we identify prioritize projects, in particular, how we prioritize and identify fish passage and water quality projects. All right, so for fish passage projects, the comprehensive plan uses and references our culvert improvement prioritization report. Right. So what fish passage work is, it's really generally prioritized based on the project's benefit, how many miles or distance of creek that we're opening up to fish habitat. But we also try and align with other efforts, such as creek restoration projects that we're doing, washdock culvert replacements, and other similar type work. All right. So for water quality project locations, we prioritize these by trying to align with habitat and restoration efforts. Okay, so the comprehensive plan, again, uses and references the Bellingham Habitat Technical Assessment, and that helps us prioritize the locations for our water quality projects, right? So that assessment, what it does is it focuses habitat improvements in an area where restoration efforts are likely to result in ecological improvements across multiple habitat groups and types. So really what that assessment does is it focuses restoration projects and efforts into 5 sub-watersheds of priority. Those sub-watersheds include the Lower Padden Creek sub-watershed, the Lower Squalicum Creek sub-watershed, the Lower Baker Creek sub-watershed, the Spring Creek sub-watershed, and then finally the Baker Creek tributary sub-watershed. All right, to expand upon that idea of where we're going to be locating the projects, Chapter 8 of the Comprehensive Plan actually includes some additional discussion and includes a 6 planning level prioritization category system that now helps us kind of select and actually identify the projects that we're going to implement into those priority watersheds. So those priority criteria include to maintain or improve compliance, to stimulate economic development, improve water quality, neighborhood investment, protect or improve aquatic resources, and then finally to renew assets or to renew our infrastructure to help us manage risk. And so the projects that we've selected in those to be located in those 5 priority watersheds, almost all of those projects meet at least 3 of these prioritization criteria. So that was how we've kind of worked through our process for selecting projects and where the project can be located. Now, to kind of wrap this up, is the rate of implementation and the number of projects that we have planned is based on available funding and other resources, right? So if council recalls, or at least committee members here recall, there was a financial analysis in Chapter 8 of our comprehensive plan. And in that analysis, it identified 4 funding levels, which had a corresponding list of projects. It was both based on some projects as well as the number of projects that we were hoping to accomplish. And City Council, with the help of staff or with the recommendation from staff, selected a medium level of funding to really best balance utility rates with capital improvement project costs. All right. Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go over the status of all of Bellingham's waterways. What I'm going to do is discuss and focus on those 5 priority waterways that are identified in the comprehensive plan and where we're going to be focusing a lot of our projects. All right, so Chapter 2 of the comprehensive plan includes watershed descriptions of those 5 priority watersheds. The descriptions include a lot of information, including the subwatershed area, its location, stream distance, history, recent projects, 303D listings, TMDL statuses, fish barrier presence, and a lot of other information. But really what council's interests seemed to be from that March 8th meeting was really looking at the 303D listings and TMDL statuses. All right, so for the lower Padden Creek subwatershed, it has a 303D listing for fecal coliform bacteria and dissolved oxygen, and has a TMDL for temperature. The lower Squalicum Creek subwatershed is 303D listed for fecal coliform bacteria and dissolved oxygen, and again has a TMDL for temperature. And then the lower Baker Creek subwatershed is 303D listed for fecal coliform bacteria and has no TMDL assigned to it. Now, before I go on to talk about the last 2 remaining subwatersheds, I do want to take a second to point out that temperature 303D listings and TMDLs are currently not tied to stormwater, right? So temperature is more of a function of the vegetated stream cover and shading and has not been directly attributed to stormwater runoff. So when we have 303D listing and temperature TMDLs, those are more actions that we meet by doing habitat restoration and such, and not stormwater water quality improvements. Okay, for those last 2 priority subwatersheds, we've got the Spring Creek subwatershed, has no 303D listings or TMDLs, and the Baker Creek tributary subwatershed, again, has no 303D listings and no applicable TMDLs. All right, so our current plan projects. The comprehensive plan includes a capital project list that's located within Chapter 8 of that comprehensive plan. And again, City Council, with recommendation from staff, selected the medium funding level. And that funding level was developed from engineering cost estimates for a list of projects. All right, so this list of projects is what we have planned for water quality and fish projects in the upcoming years, really in our upcoming 6 to potentially up to 10 years, depending upon shifting priorities. So that 6-year capital improvement program project list includes 2 large water quality underground vaults, a regional water quality system at the Iron Gate industrial area, 4 large bioretention facilities planned in the Birchwood neighborhood, 3 fish passage culvert replacements, and then a long list, well, I shouldn't say a long list, a list of stormwater conveyance system upgrades so that we can ensure our stormwater system has adequate capacity to both support future growth, but then also just as a flood management plan to make sure that we don't have a stormwater system that is or that it has adequate capacity to convey the storms that we've got coming. All right, to wrap things up here, something that's referenced in the comprehensive plan that I think is really relative to today's presentation and discussion is the city's urban streams monitoring program. So the city's urban streams monitoring program was really developed to obtain baseline water quality data for the streams that we have within our city. And so the city's been doing monthly water quality monitoring in our streams since 1990, making our urban streams monitoring program actually one of the longest standing status and trends programs within our region here north of the Seattle area. So monitoring currently takes place at 18 different sites along 10 of our major streams. And this program actually, like I said, develops a baseline water quality data. And that data is available through our website and with a phone call request to our laboratory staff. So if anybody is interested in that monitoring data, it is publicly available. And with that, I'm going to close things out. Thank you, everybody, for their time and consideration, and really focus the rest of this time here on answering any questions that council might have. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jason. Why don't you go ahead and stop sharing your screen so we can see everyone. Committee members. Oh, it's Mr. Fleetwood. Go ahead, Mayor.
Can you comment on what the believed source is of the fecal coliform?
Yeah, and so it's going to be a diverse source. It's going to have natural backgrounds from wildlife. It could be, in a rare instance, of a septic system or sewer lines, which we've already evaluated. It could be people using our riparian areas, or it could be dogs is likely one of our largest candidates. And so it really is, fecal coliform bacteria they come from the gut of warm-blooded animals, humans, dogs, wildlife. We don't know primary sources. What we do know are the really common sources of bacteria.
And how bad is it?
What I can say is for Whatcom Creek and its tributary streams, we have an upcoming bacteria TMDL for Whatcom Creek and its tributary streams. So monitoring data has showed that it has reached a level and has a consistent trending level that we will now have a cleanup plan or cleanup action from the state and federal government on Whatcom Creek. So.
Does a cleanup plan require doing more research and identifying the source?
Yeah, absolutely. The TMDL, like I presented for Lake Whatcom, it's not actually just us cleaning up the water. It's us doing a lot of studies, monitoring and studies to start really narrowing down uncertainty in these sources and the reductions that we need to make.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If I may, I'll just add to that. Whatcom Creek has high bacteria numbers, but it's not any different than any other urban stream out there. This is really typical with urban streams.
Yeah. Thanks, Renee. No, that's a good distinction. Whatcom Creek is not dirtier than what we would have in other similar type communities.
Mr. Johnson, I saw you maybe wanting to speak.
But just really, if Jason or Renee, could you speak to the difference or similar the point source versus non-point source pollutions as it relates to fecal coliform bacteria, and how we address those? I guess is maybe one. It's there, we know it's there, but how do we deal with it? What are the things that we do to deal with both the point source and non-point source pollution? Yeah,
and so Renee, unless you want to get going. Most of what we're looking at for fecal coliform bacteria are going to be considered non-point sources, right? They're not from a specific stormwater outfall or a discrete pipe. And so for those non-point sources, we really rely on a lot of education and outreach efforts to make those improvements. This isn't somewhere where where the city can construct a water quality system at the end of the pipe to remove bacteria. It's going to be a lot of education and outreach. It's going to be communicating to our citizens about what kind of actions that they can take to reduce their impacts, such as picking up dog poop on their walks to help meet these bacteria reductions.
Councilmember Stone?
Yeah, just briefly to follow up on that point, you mentioned that there would be federal funding coming to assist specifically with Whatcom Creek. Is there a timeline for that funding, and then I guess the implementation of whatever would follow from that?
Yeah, so now we would have the ability to apply for grants for water quality projects from Whatcom Creek starting today. But when we actually have a TMDL applied to the impaired water body, it actually increases the available funds. It also increases our competitiveness through grants, because what we're trying to do is use our grants to meet federal and state cleanup requirements. So similar to Lake Whatcom, is it does allow us to then leverage other state funds through grants and such.
We would not expect, Ms. Stone, however, specific grant funds from the state specifically identified or allocated directly to Whatcom Creek. These are grant funds that are available for programs across the country, and we would be competitive in applying for those, and our competitiveness would increase because of that TMDL. Mm-hmm. Now, to the benefit of our local community, the surface and stormwater utility is not simply the pipes in the ground. As Jason alluded to or stated clearly earlier, the funding for the utility also is intended to improve our aquatic habitat and streams resources. So we are trying to, where we can, find that balance between a very high level of capital investment or program investment and affordability of rates. So the council chose that medium funding plan, which had a significant increase in rates to our local ratepayers. But what that does is it helps us to approach those projects more aggressively than many other communities in the state of Washington, and do it in a way that is, as Jason pointed out, risk-based and where problems are occurring, we can use our local funding to approach that. So the local funding that we have will be greatly leveraged against grants that are available, but I don't want to give the impression that with the TMDL comes direct specific funding for that. It just increases our potential to be competitive. Now, with our funding source, we are much more competitive than other places. So.
Any further discussion?
So I guess just sorry.
Go ahead.
One more question was, when you were talking about those urban streams, I think you said there were 18 sites and that testing's been happening since 1990. Have those sites remained unchanged? I mean, so through that period of time, or does the sites migrate a little bit based on, I don't know, what we're observing through the data collection?
Yeah, they are in the same locations. Now, there may be shifts slightly, usually because of access challenges, right? If there's vegetation that's grown up in some of the areas, it could create some challenges. But no, it is a consistent water quality baseline database with the same streams and the same locations over that long period of time. We are adding, actually, we added a short time ago, paired sampling for both fecal coliform bacteria and E. coli, right? So water quality standards are shifting away from fecal coliform and into E. coli, but we want to maintain that baseline. So we're going to continue to monitor fecal coliform, but we added E. coli there to kind of keep up with the changes in state water quality standards.
Great. And it's probably beyond the scope of this particular agenda item, but just hearing reference to, the community education piece and how important it's going to be moving forward, that all of our residents and visitors within the city are sort of playing an active role in the care of our streams and waterways, I think is really critical. So just want to voice, and I don't think there's any question, but voice support for that going forward.
We all have a role to play. So.
That's probably an excellent place to leave it. That kind of answers the why of why we're doing all this good work. Thank you, Mr. Porter, for reporting on the comprehensive plan and the 6-year capital projects and the reason that goes behind them. Is there any further discussion? There's no action needed for this item. This would be the last item for the committee, at which point there'll be a break. I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting and return control of the meeting back to you, Council President Stone.
Thank you, Councilmember Lillquist. So we will pause. Our next meeting is the Planning Committee meeting. It's scheduled for 10:15, and I wanted to confirm I know we need a pause regardless to allow Deputy Clerk Oaks to queue up the next meeting, but I wanted to check with legal as well if we had to wait. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is a rarity, but if we need to wait until 10:15, in which case we'll break, or if we can continue to the next meeting when Deputy Clerk Oaks is ready.
I think you could continue. You may have some people that will miss out from the public that we're planning to connect to Zoom at 10:15 to see those proceedings. So I know that council has some things that it needs to take care of between 11 and 1. That's going to be council president's call on whether to proceed or wait until 10:15.
Okay. Obviously, we announce the meeting times and make those public so that members of the public can join us live if they so choose. So we will take a break then and reconvene at 10:15.